When British airborne troops came down west of Arnhem on September 17, 1944, they carried the hardest mission in all of Operation Market Garden. Reach the bridge, take it before the Germans could organize, hold it until British ground forces arrived from the south. On paper, the task looked direct. In reality, it began to break apart almost immediately. The drop zones were miles from the bridge. Only part of the force reached the objective quickly. German resistance built faster than expected, and within hours, what had been planned as a fast airborne seizure was turning into a battle of delay, fragmentation, and survival. This is the story of Arnhem, the fight that came to define the failure of Market Garden. Arnhem was the northern end of the Allied plan. It was the last and most important bridge in the chain running from the Belgian border through Eindhoven and Nijmegen into the central Netherlands. If the bridge over the lower Rhine at Arnhem could be captured and held, the Allies would gain a crossing beyond one of the final major river barriers before Germany. That did not guarantee a breakthrough into the Ruhr, but it kept the possibility alive. If Arnhem failed, the whole logic of Market Garden would begin to collapse from the top down. That is why the mission given to the British 1st Airborne Division was so dangerous. They were not just seizing a bridge, they were trying to hold the key to the entire operation while depending on a relief force that still had to fight its way north along a narrow road. The division under Major General Roy Urquhart had roughly 10,000 men committed to the battle, though not all would arrive at once. Later, elements of the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade under General Stanislaw Sosabowski were intended to reinforce the fight. But from the beginning, the British at Arnhem faced a problem that shaped everything else. They were not landing directly on the bridge. One of the most debated decisions in the Arnhem battle concerns the landing zones. The British were dropped and landed several miles west of the bridge, near Renkum, Heelsum, and Wolfhees. The reasoning was understandable. Closer landing zones were considered riskier because of flak, terrain limits, and the danger of confusion during a large airborne landing. But what looked safer on paper became more dangerous in battle. Those extra miles cost time. Men had to assemble, units had to gather equipment, columns had to move through roads, woods, and open ground before even reaching Arnhem itself. And all the while, the Germans were recovering from the shock of the landings. This point matters because it explains why the battle unfolded the way it did. The British did not arrive at the bridge as one compact striking force. They arrived in pieces. And war is ruthless toward forces that arrive in pieces. Only one part of the division reached the objective quickly enough to establish itself there. That was the battalion led by Lieutenant Colonel John Frost. On the first day of the battle, Frost's men, mainly from the 2nd Parachute Battalion, with supporting elements, managed to fight their way through to the northern end of the Arnhem Road Bridge. This was one of the most impressive small unit achievements of the entire campaign. Despite confusion after the landing, despite growing German resistance, and despite the widening gap between units, Frost's force reached the most important objective in the northern sector of Market Garden. In another battle, that might have been the opening of success. Here, it became the beginning of isolation. Frost did not arrive with the full strength of the division behind him. Other British battalions were delayed, redirected, blocked, or drawn into separate fights in and around Arnhem. So the force that actually reached the bridge now had to defend it almost alone. At the bridge, Frost's men occupied houses and buildings at the northern approaches. They set up anti-tank weapons, organized fields of fire, and prepared for a defense that they already knew might become severe. They had taken the objective. Now they had to survive at it. One of the reasons Arnhem became so decisive is the speed of the German response. The British were not facing only rear area troops and scattered local defenders. In the wider area were elements of the 9th SS Panzer Division Hohenstaufen and the 10th SS Panzer Division Frundsberg. These formations had been battered in Normandy, but they still had armored vehicles, experienced officers, and enough organization to react. That was enough. German commanders improvised blocking positions, redirected available armor, and moved quickly to contain British penetration routes. Roads that needed to stay open for the airborne advance became contested. Small firefights hardened into more serious engagements. The British lost the speed they needed. This is where Arnhem became a battle of fragmentation. The division was no longer moving as one force toward one objective. It was being broken into disconnected fights across the western approaches to Arnhem, the suburbs, and the ground around Oosterbeek. And once the British were divided, the Germans no longer had to win a perfect battle. They only had to stop enough British troops from reaching Frost. That, in practice, was enough to end the original plan. And another of the battle's most important weaknesses was communication. British radio performance in the Arnhem area became one of the most damaging technical failures of the entire operation. Sets often had limited range. Reception was unreliable. Urban terrain and wooded ground made communication even harder. Units lost contact. Headquarters struggled to understand what was happening in real time. This may sound technical. Its consequences were not. A weak signal meant a battalion moved without clear coordination. A failed transmission meant a commander reacted late. A broken radio network meant the division fought in fragments instead of as a single controlled force. At Arnhem, the radio problem did not create the defeat by itself, but it made every other problem worse. It made it harder to reinforce Frost, harder to coordinate attacks, harder for Urquhart to control a battlefield that was already becoming confused. This is why radio failure has become one of the most famous symbols of Arnhem. Not because it was dramatic on its own, but because it quietly damaged the British at exactly the wrong time. By the 18th and 19th of September, Frost's men at the bridge were under heavy pressure. They defended the northern approaches house by house and room by room. British anti-tank teams used PIAT launchers and guns against German armored vehicles trying to force their way through. The bridge sector became a compact urban battlefield where every building mattered and every line of sight could kill. This kind of fighting was brutal. The defenders were outnumbered. They had limited heavy support. They were under growing artillery and armored pressure, and they could not simply give up ground without surrendering the very objective they had been sent to seize. For a time, they held with extraordinary determination. German attacks were repulsed. Vehicles were knocked out. Frost's men imposed delay far greater than the Germans would have wanted. But isolation in war is unforgiving. Supplies ran low. Buildings burned. Medical treatment became harder. Casualties mounted. And the relief they were waiting for did not come. By the time the bridge position collapsed, the battalion had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. Frost himself was wounded. Of the roughly 700 to 750 men who held the bridge area, only a small fraction would avoid death, wounds, or captivity by the end. That is one reason Arnhem became legendary. Not because it was a clean, heroic victory, but because it was a disciplined stand that could not be sustained. While Frost's men were holding at the bridge, the rest of the British division was fighting a different battle and losing the race to join them. Units that had failed to break through toward Arnhem were gradually pushed back or forced back toward Oosterbeek, west of the town. The British formed a defensive perimeter around what remained of the division. This became the second phase of Arnhem. Instead of one concentrated airborne assault on the bridge, the British were now split between an isolated bridge garrison and a larger but increasingly compressed defensive pocket around Oosterbeek. By September 20th, the original British mission at Arnhem had effectively failed. Frost could not be reinforced in strength. The bridge would not be held by the division as a whole. The battle had become one of endurance and survival. At Oosterbeek, airborne infantry, glider troops, engineers, medics, and support personnel fought under constant pressure. Mortars, artillery, snipers, armored probes, and local attacks wore down the perimeter. Food and ammunition became increasingly scarce. Aid posts filled with wounded. Gardens, houses, and roadside ditches became defensive lines, and still they held. That endurance is often overshadowed by the drama of Frost at the bridge. But it was just as important. Oosterbeek was what remained of the British 1st Airborne Division after the original plan had broken apart. Everything the British at Arnhem were doing depended on one thing: the relief force coming from the south. That force, 30th Corps. It had begun its advance on September 17th and had to fight its way north along the single road running through Eindhoven, Veghel, Grave, and Nijmegen. This was the route that later became known as Hell's Highway. It was the lifeline of the operation and also one of its greatest weaknesses. The road was narrow, exposed, and vulnerable to blockage. German counterattacks repeatedly struck the corridor. At Sun, the destruction of the bridge caused an early delay. Around Veghel and other points, the route was threatened or cut. Traffic built up. Engineers had to work under pressure. Every pause traveled forward through the Allied timetable. That is the key point. The men at Arnhem were not simply waiting for help. They were waiting for help that had to survive Hell's Highway first. And that help was moving too slowly. One of the most dramatic moments of the campaign came on September 20th, when American paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division crossed the Waal River at Nijmegen in canvas boats under heavy German fire to help secure the bridge there. It was an extraordinary feat of courage, but even that success came too late to save Arnhem, because by then, the clock had already outrun the plan. As the battle worsened, Allied command tried to reinforce the British survivors. The Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade, under General Stanislaw Sosabowski, was dropped on September 21st near Driel, south of the Rhine. The Poles had always been part of the broader Arnhem plan, but weather, timing, and the collapsing situation sharply limited what they could do. They landed under difficult conditions and found that crossing the Rhine to reinforce Oosterbeek was far harder than expected. Boats were scarce, German fire was heavy, ferrying men across the river was dangerous and only partly successful. Some Polish troops did get across, but nowhere near enough to reverse the battle. By this stage, Arnhem was no longer a battle for the bridge. It was a battle to preserve what remained of the airborne force. Between 21 and 25 September, the Oosterbeek perimeter held under relentless pressure. Resupply drops were often inaccurate or fell into German hands. Rain and battlefield chaos made conditions worse. The wounded accumulated. Ammunition remained tight. The situation became impossible to sustain. On the night of September 25th to 26th, the surviving British and Polish forces north of the Rhine were withdrawn in Operation Berlin. Under darkness and with the help of boats and engineers, roughly 2,000 to 2,500 men were evacuated across the river. The battle was over. The cost of Arnhem was devastating. Of the roughly 10,000 men of the British 1st Airborne Division committed to the operation, only around 2,000 to 2,500 got out across the Rhine. The division suffered about 1,400 killed, and more than 6,000 were captured, wounded, or missing. For practical purposes, it was shattered. The Polish brigade also took losses in the fighting around Driel and the attempted crossings. German casualties in the Arnhem sector were significant as well, likely several thousand killed, wounded, or missing, but the Germans held the ground. For Dutch civilians, the suffering was severe. Homes were destroyed, streets became battlefields, civilians were trapped between armies and occupation. That is why Arnhem became more than a battlefield. It became the symbol of the entire operation because it concentrated every major weakness of Market Garden into one place. Distance, delay, fragmentation, stronger than expected German resistance, communication failure, and the brutal cost of arriving too late. The British at Arnhem did not fail because they lacked courage. They failed because courage could not repair a broken timetable. That is what makes Arnhem unforgettable. Arnhem lasted from 17th to 26th September 1944. In those 9 days, what had begun as the decisive airborne stroke of Market Garden turned into a battle of isolation, attrition, and delay. A battalion reached the bridge, but the division could not hold the town. Relief fought its way north, but too slowly. Reinforcements arrived, but too late and in too few numbers. And behind all of it was the same hard truth. Arnhem depended on a timetable that the battlefield had already broken. The road to the north, the route later remembered as Hell's Highway, could not deliver relief fast enough. And once that happened, the The British airborne force at Arnhem was left to carry a burden no isolated division could carry for long. That is why Arnhem became the symbol of Market Garden, not just because it was dramatic, but because it showed, in one place, exactly how a bold operation can come apart when time, distance, and coordination all begin to fail at once. In the final episode, we step back from the bridge and look at the whole design, and why the larger operation was far more fragile than it first appeared.